The morning I started, London was doing what it does best, putting on a show. The Thames glittered like hammered gold, light bouncing off the glass towers of Canary Wharf and streaming straight through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 18th floor, landing exactly on the contract I was about to sign. HR walked me through the entire office. Open-plan desks, a view of the O2 Arena's white dome crouching by the water like a giant clam, 2 double-shot espresso machines in the kitchen, and a fridge full of branded still water. On the wall, an electronic board cycled through stock prices and weather updates from every global office: Tokyo sunny, New York overcast, London partly cloudy. Sarah, the HR rep, told me this was a world-class fintech company, with employees from 24 countries, a culture of diversity, and unlimited opportunity. She spoke with the polished enthusiasm of someone who'd delivered this orientation speech 100 times. Her smile held at the exact angle that said *welcome, you belong here. I believed every word of it. My title was Senior Financial Analyst, assigned to Business Intelligence, reporting directly to a senior director named Michael Chen. Our first meeting was in his office, door half open, and when he looked up from his screen and rose to shake my hand, the movement was so fluid it seemed rehearsed. A matte silver cufflink caught the light as he extended his arm. He'd emigrated 5 years ahead of me, and his accent had shed every trace of its origins. His vowels had that clipped, lazy English finish, his chin lifted at a slight angle that wasn't quite arrogance but wasn't quite not. Charcoal suit, sharp tailoring, shoes polished to a mirror gleam. On his wall hung a framed photograph, a golf course, green fairways stretching behind him, a club in his hand, and that easy, satisfied smile that said, "I've arrived." "Welcome," he said, and his smile held for precisely 2 seconds. "Our team needs someone with your background." The pause before "a background" was barely perceptible, but I caught it. At the time, I assumed he meant bilingual skills and cross-cultural experience. It took me a long time to understand he meant something else entirely. He gestured for me to sit, poured me a glass of water, asked the usual questions: what I'd done at my last firm, why London, what I hoped to build. I answered honestly. He nodded along, but his eyes stayed on me a beat longer than social comfort usually allowed. As I was leaving, he added, "My door is always open. Come to me with anything." I glanced back. The door was, indeed, open. On his desk lay a spread of papers with numbers I couldn't quite make out from that distance. I thought he was friendly, professional, a good leader to work under. That was the last normal conversation we ever had. The first 3 months passed without incident. I was assigned a mid-sized Nordic logistics client, steady revenue streams, clean financials, predictable monthly cycles. I arrived at 9, left around 6:30, occasional evenings until 7, which in London terms counted as moderate. By 6 o'clock, most of our floor had thinned out. The ones who stayed were predominantly Asian faces, a silent understanding among us that we'd log another 20 or 30 minutes while pretending not to notice everyone else leaving. We'd catch each other's eyes across the rows of desks, a quick, wordless acknowledgement, and nobody would be the first to stand. Michael and I interacted only through weekly department meetings and occasional emails. The meetings ran 40 minutes, him scribbling on the whiteboard, calling on people for updates. When my turn came, I read my numbers. He nodded once, said, "Good job, Emily," in the flat monotone of someone reciting a script he'd read too many times. Emails came back within 2 hours, crisp, neutral, nothing out of place. By any standard corporate measure, the relationship was faultless. Looking back, those 3 months were the stillness before the storm, the kind of silence that makes you forget there's weather coming. The shift came in month 4. The company landed a major Asia-Pacific client, Singapore-based, spanning 6 Southeast Asian markets, A contract size that prompted the CFO to mention it by name in an all-hands meeting. Our finance team scrambled for weeks, untangling the client's complex accounting structure, exchanging over 400 emails just to map their payment cycles. Michael announced in a departmental meeting that I would take point on the financial coordination. His reasoning sounded impeccable. Emily's bilingual. She can communicate directly with their finance team in both English and Mandarin. I felt a flush of gratitude. A new hire, only 4 months in, entrusted with a flagship account. Surely that meant I was being seen, valued, fast-tracked. Across the table, James looked at me without any expression at all, but his fingers tapped 3 times against his notebook. I didn't think anything of it then. Naive. The first red flag appeared in week 2 of the new assignment. The client's purchase orders and payment records didn't align. They'd marked certain invoices as a fully paid, but our bank statements showed no corresponding deposits. Even stranger, other payments had cleared on our end but lacked any matching purchase order numbers in the system. In proper finance, that's impossible. Every pound in has to match a pound out, tracked to a specific contract, a specific line item. That's the spine of the whole operation. I assumed I'd made a mistake. I re-exported everything, reran the comparisons, same result. I emailed procurement to request the missing PO numbers, copying Michael. The procurement officer replied a day later, his wording deliberately vague. Some transaction records related to this client may be incomplete due to a system migration. We're looking into it. I stared at that response. System migration, a phrase that polite, the kind of catch-all excuse people use when they don't want to tell you the real reason. I didn't push. I saved the email. 3 days later, Michael called me into his office. The door closed behind me. First time that had happened. Emily, he said, leaning back in his chair, twirling a pen between his fingers, you've been looking into the Asia-Pacific account? I have. There are a few payments that don't match up with POs, so I emailed procurement and they. Don't worry about that. He set the pen down, laced his hands on the desk, his voice smooth as still water. The client has their own accounting rhythm. Faster than ours, sometimes. System lags are normal. All we need to reflect in our reports is the receipt side. But under company compliance policy, every payment has to tie to a PO before it can be booked. Otherwise the quarterly audit. He raised a hand, palm out, cutting me off with the crisp finality of a traffic officer stopping a car. I've been in this industry 15 years, he said, his voice still calm but something hardening behind his eyes, like frost forming over a pond. I know better than you what's necessary and what isn't. There's always operational flexibility. Headquarters understands how things work in practice. I stood there, my mind racing through the implications. What did headquarters understands mean? That they knew and looked the other way? That they'd tacitly approved this? The difference between those two interpretations was enormous, and it would determine what I did next. I didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched 2-3 seconds. Any more questions? His tone was still pleasant, but pleasant the way a locked door is pleasant, smooth, unyielding, no handle on your side. No. Good. He picked up his pen again, already looking back at his screen. Get back to work, then. I turned and pulled the door open. Behind me, his voice floated out, light and dismissive, Emily, don't overcomplicate things. Just do your job. I nodded without turning around and stepped out. The door clicked shut. The sound was small, precise, absolute. That evening, I stayed late. The floor emptied around me, colleague by colleague, until only my desk lamp and the hum of overhead fluorescents kept me company. Outside, Canary Wharf's skyline blazed against the darkening sky, reflections scattered across the glass like scattered coins. I opened the company system's back-end and pulled every financial record connected to the Asia-Pacific client for the past 6 months. Bank statements, payment approval forms, invoice scans, PDF contracts, system logs. Hours of work, organizing, cross-referencing, all the while turning over in my mind what I was looking for and what I might find. When I finished, I sat motionless in front of the screen. The pattern was unmistakable. Every month, 3 or 4 payments ranging from £50,000 to £200,000 had no matching purchase orders. They'd all cleared the full approval workflow, each step initialed and timestamped, every electronic signature trailing upward through the chain until it reached the final approver. One name. Every time. Michael Chen. I counted. 14 payments in 6 months. Total value, over £400,000. Each transaction carried a different note in the comments field: advance payment, service adjustment, exchange rate compensation, temporary bridging, but none had a single supporting purchase contract attached. Not one. I sorted the records chronologically, created a new encrypted folder, and saved everything. Then I wiped the download logs from the system. My hands were steady. My pulse hadn't quickened. In that moment, I didn't know exactly what I would do with this material, but my instincts told me to keep it, hide it, wait. Some things aren't immediately useful, they just feel important, and you learn to trust that feeling. At the time, I thought I'd uncovered procedural sloppiness, not a deliberate architecture. The deterioration started slowly, like tea steeping too long. The color deepens day by day, the bitterness rising from the bottom of the cup until it's all you can taste. The first overt change came at quarter end. Michael asked me to sign a backdated purchase authorization form. Client was late submitting their paperwork, he explained. We need to fill the system gap or the quarterly report won't balance. I scanned the document. £87,000. A supplier name I'd never encountered. Payment dated 3 months earlier. I set the form on his desk. When did this supplier get added to the approved vendor list? I asked. They're new. The list update goes through next week. It's all in motion. Then I'll sign when the list is updated, I said. Better to have all the documentation complete before anything gets booked. The desk lamp cast a triangle of shadow across his face. His smile stayed fixed, but the muscles around his eyes didn't move. Emily, he said, dropping his voice half a register, paper process and operational reality are 2 different things. You haven't been here long enough to understand how this industry actually works. I understand that I need to see a complete approval chain before I sign anything. That's the core responsibility of my role. The office went silent. He held my gaze, his smile retracting millimeter by millimeter, until his mouth was a flat line. For the first time, I saw his face stripped of performance, cold, hard, a door bolted from the inside. Emily. His voice had dropped to barely more than a whisper. Your position in this company. I gave it to you. He stood, walked around his desk, and left the room. The door remained open. Air from the hallway blew in, riffling the edge of the purchase form on the desk. I sat alone, staring at the supplier name and the amount, and took a photo of the document with my phone. That was our last civil exchange. Everything after that was a silent war, and he had far more ammunition than I did. First came the reassignments. In the next department meeting, Michael announced, with the casual air of someone tweaking a lunch menu, that my client portfolio would be optimized for better team efficiency. Without warning, my reporting responsibilities shifted to James. James kept his head down, scribbling in his notebook, but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch upward. I said nothing during the meeting. Afterwards, I went to Michael's office. "The Asia-Pacific monthly report is due next week," I said. "James hasn't worked with that client's data structure before. Is there a transition plan?" "James is experienced enough," Michael said without looking up from his screen. "He'll manage." "And what's my new assignment?" He raised his eyes then. "We'll see. Maintain the 2 reports you still have." 2 reports. I counted backward. 5 core projects had dwindled to 3, then to 2, the most basic maintenance work, less than half my original volume. I waited a few seconds to see if he'd add anything. He didn't. I said, "Understood," and left. From that day forward, a clear pattern emerged in my work log. Emails I sent went unanswered for days, sometimes met with a curt, "noted," that felt like a door closing. James, asking the same questions, got replies within the hour, enthusiastic replies, complete with exclamation points. I tested it once. I asked a question, got silence. James asked the exact same question, got Michael's instant approval. The results measured my standing like a ruler laid across the table, every inch marked in indifference. Around the same time, the kitchen dynamics shifted. Colleagues who'd once joined me for lunch began manufacturing excuses, packed their own food, had other plans, wanted to eat outside. Their eyes flicked away when they told me, a half-second of guilty avoidance before they moved on. I understood. In London's corporate ecosystem, self-preservation is everyone's default setting. I didn't blame them. But eating alone in the kitchen, the winter sun falling across the crinkled plastic of my sandwich wrapper, the light seemed harsher than it should have been. By month 5, I had 2 reports and 3 or 4 hours of actual work each day. The rest of my time was spent staring at a blinking cursor, the screen's glow the only thing filling the silence. Michael would pass my desk occasionally, glance at the monitor, and keep walking. He'd stopped speaking to me entirely, even the fake smiles were gone. Then came the pay cut. November. A Wednesday. Coffee still half-finished on my desk when HR's email arrived, notification of salary adjustment. I skimmed it, based on departmental restructuring and performance evaluation. Your monthly base salary will be reduced by 15% effective next month. Attached was a PDF, a page and a half of explanation, the core justification reading. Current performance has not met core job requirements. I read that sentence over and over. Performance not meeting requirements? In 10 months, I'd never had a single formal performance review. Company policy required employee acknowledgement of all evaluations, documented feedback sessions, written notification of any concerns. None of that had happened. None. I printed the notice and walked to HR. Sarah was at her desk, typing. She looked up and smiled, but the smile had a strained quality, like she already knew what I was about to ask. "Sarah, I need to verify the basis for this adjustment," I said, placing the paper on her desk. "I've never received any performance feedback, any written warning, any formal review. This doesn't align with company policy." She took the paper, studied it, her expression turning cautious. "This evaluation was submitted by Michael last month. It includes detailed documentation." She turned her screen toward me. There it was, a formal assessment form, dated the 15th of the previous month, rating all my core metrics at the lowest level. Attached were 3 pages of supporting notes, listing instances of underperformance, delayed data delivery, insufficient analytical depth, poor team collaboration scores. "These instances," I said, pointing at the screen. Are there specific dates and project names attached? Sarah scrolled down. The language was vague, filled with qualifiers, tended to, occasionally, overall. Not a single reference to a specific email, a concrete deliverable, an exact date. The only detail was a mention of a delayed project, a delay caused entirely by an upstream department's failure to provide data on time, a fact I had documented in multiple email chains. I explained this to Sarah, calmly, point by point. I showed her the emails proving the project delay was beyond my control. I pointed out that every example cited in the evaluation had never been discussed with me, had never been raised in any meeting, had never appeared in any written communication. Under the Employee Handbook, Chapter 12, Section 3, any performance improvement evaluation required a formal face-to-face meeting with documented notes. None existed. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Her fingers hovered over her keyboard. She didn't look at me. Finally, she said, "Emily, I can record your concerns. But salary adjustments are within the director's authority. If you want to challenge this formally, you'll need to file an HR complaint." "Then give me the complaint form," I said. She handed me a single sheet, employee grievance application. I noticed her fingers curled slightly at the paper's edge, as if she wanted to say something but stopped herself. I walked out of HR with the form in my hand and met James in the corridor. He was laughing with someone from another department, but his smile cooled when he saw me, then re-warmed, practiced and quick. "Heard there might be some team changes coming," he said, his voice bright with false casualness. "Changes? Not sure, really. Michael mentioned something in a management meeting. Efficiency improvements, that sort of thing." He paused. "You've been handing off quite a few projects lately, haven't you?" I looked at him and didn't answer. He waited a beat, then shrugged and walked away. I followed a few steps behind, passing his desk on the way to mine, and caught a glimpse of his screen, still open to the Asia-Pacific account's transaction history. The same data I'd organized months ago. He'd taken over that client over a month earlier, and he was still combing through the files I'd built. He probably thought I'd forgotten my own indexing structure. That afternoon, I pulled every single work email I'd ever sent or received, sorted them by date, type, subject. I'd never deleted a single one. Years of habit, never delete, always screenshot approvals, always confirm verbal conversations in writing, had built a slow, patient accumulation of evidence, and now the time had come to use it. I organized everything at my desk, screen glow reflecting off my face, footsteps muffled by the carpet as colleagues passed. I didn't hide my screen. I wanted them to see me digging through old records. Sometimes, the knowledge that someone is preparing, that's a deterrent in itself. December and January were a quiet interlude. Christmas and New Year drained the office of urgency. Michael took 2 weeks off. James went back to his parents in Surrey. I sat alone in the near-empty office, the silence pressing in from all sides, and used those weeks to build my case systematically. I took 2 annual leave days, shut myself in my flat, stacked takeaway containers on the kitchen counter, and let the screen's light fill my waking hours. The work broke into 3 categories. First category, work allocation and performance records. I arranged every email Michael had ever sent me about assignments, annotated every questionable decision, every transfer of projects, every shift in workload. I built an Excel comparison chart, my project volume and budget allocation on one line, James's on the other. The 2 lines tracked together for the first 3 months, then diverged sharply, mine falling, his rising. By month 8, they formed a clear X, one descending, the other climbing. Under each data point, I attached the original email or system timestamp, so everything could be independently verified. Second category, financial irregularities. This was the most painstaking work, taking an entire weekend. I cross-referenced every Asia-Pacific payment against purchase contracts, approval workflows, and actual bank statements. Three-way comparison revealed 16 payments that fell into the overlapping zone: no PO, approved, cleared. Total value, £637,000, distributed across 4 different clearing accounts, some labeled prepayment bridge, others FX adjustment pending. 2 identified only by numerical codes that revealed nothing about their actual purpose. For each transaction, I attached the payment request, approval chain screenshot, bank statement image, system log. Every row had a red highlighted column labeled missing element and another labeled responsible party. The missing elements varied, the responsible party never did. Michael Chen. I also traced the creation history of those 4 clearing accounts, when they were set up, who requested them. 3 of them had been created between September and November, all on applications submitted by Michael himself. The timing aligned perfectly with when he'd told me to stop worrying about it. On the night I finished that compilation, I sat on my couch with a cup of tea gone cold beside me. January rain pressed against the window, and the streetlights outside smeared into blurry halos on the wet glass. I stared at those red highlighted cells, lined up like warning lights on a control panel. £637,000. 4 hidden accounts. 16 unbacked transactions. Every approval trail converging on the same person. I didn't know where the money had ultimately gone. Maybe to a third party with undisclosed ties to the company. Maybe Michael was operating a gray market cash pooling scheme. Maybe there was a larger system of quiet permission from higher up. I couldn't prove any of that. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty: if compliance ever saw this table, anyone with basic governance training would understand exactly what it meant. I saved the table under an innocuous file name, Q3_summary_data, buried deep in my cloud storage. I printed a hard copy, ordered the pages chronologically, sealed them in a manila envelope with 2 strips of tape, and locked it in the small safe in my bedroom. The safe had come with the apartment, left by the previous tenant, and I'd never touched it. That night, I said its combination for the first time. Third category, workplace bullying and pay reduction. Simple and direct: the salary notice, HR emails, cancelled project lists, the record of public criticisms, the phantom performance evaluation that appeared in my personnel file without ever being shown to me. I arranged all the relevant screenshots into a timeline, adding brief context notes. Department meeting, March 12. Michael publicly criticized data quality without prior warning, even though the data was provided directly by James and I only summarized it. About a dozen such entries, increasing in frequency from month 5 to month 11. I also spent an evening reconstructing colleagues' behavioral shifts, the averted eyes, the cancelled lunch plans, the awkward silences in group chats after I'd posted something. I wrote these in a private journal, not in the formal evidence folder, but I knew that if anyone ever asked about hostile work environment, these details would be part of the story. When the compilation was complete, I sorted everything into 3 tiers. Highest tier contained the 16 financial irregularities, middle tier held performance and pay cut documentation. Lower tier included work allocation and daily communication records. 3 tiers, stored in 3 different places: encrypted USB drive I carried with me, cloud backup, and the locked safe in my flat. It was past midnight when I closed my laptop and sat in the dark living room. Streetlight bled through the curtain, a thin amber stripe across the wall. The refrigerator hummed. I thought about Michael's words on my first day, "Our team needs someone with your background." I thought about that golf course photo on his wall, that relaxed, satisfied smile. I passed that photo every day, and every day I glanced at it without fully understanding why, like a map pinned to a wall, showing a place I'd never visited but somehow recognized. Then I remembered his other line, "Your position in this company, I gave it to you." I hadn't answered him then. But I knew something: the things people give, they can also have taken away. In late January, James posted a message in the department group chat asking if anyone had a good lawyer recommendation. He added a crying laughing emoji and said it was for a friend. No one replied. I saw the message while drinking water in the kitchen, my cup pausing halfway to my mouth. For a friend, I watched him from the rim of my cup, sitting at his desk, scrolling on his phone, a faint smile on his face. He probably didn't know that his message had just been added to my screenshot collection, filed under Colleague Behavioral Notes, timestamped January 23rd, with a single line of annotation, James openly inquiring about legal representation, intent unclear. It could have been a coincidence. But in a situation as leaky as mine, I couldn't afford to ignore any coincidence. February brought a palpable tension back to the department. Michael returned from holiday, thinner, darker hollows under his eyes. In the first weekly meeting, he spent 20 minutes outlining the new year's performance criteria, emphasizing compliance and discipline more times than anyone could count. Every time he said those words, his gaze swept the room like a scanner. Everyone sat upright. No one asked questions. I noticed a detail: after Michael finished the compliance section, James's posture changed. He'd been leaning forward, elbows on the table, then he leaned back, folded his hands over his stomach, fixed his eyes on an indistinct point on the tabletop. The posture of someone listening to music they'd rather not hear, unable to take off the headphones. After the meeting, I stayed in my seat an extra 2 minutes and jotted down Michael's key phrases on my phone. The company will strengthen financial process audits. All approval records must be complete and traceable. If anyone has questions about internal processes, they should raise them directly with their supervisor first, don't take detours. Together, those 3 sentences formed a careful choreography, the first 2 aimed as warnings, the third aimed as a preemptive block on whatever I might be planning. But he didn't know about the anonymous email yet. On a night in early March, I sat on my living room couch with an old laptop I hadn't touched since university, pulled from the top shelf of my closet and charged for the first time in years. The machine was pristine, no saved logins, no history, nothing linking it to me. I walked 3 blocks to a public Wi-Fi zone, connected, opened a newly created anonymous email account, a meaningless string of letters and numbers, registered with a disposable phone number through the same public network. I typed 3 lines. Suspected irregular payments in the Asia-Pacific client account lacking purchase order support. Multiple clearing accounts, suffixes XG047, XF112, XT089, XM003, show unusual fund consolidation. Recommend audit of all non-standard approval workflows from July 2023 through March 2024. No salutation. No signature. No attachments. I timed the send for 4:17 a.m., when the network logs would be choked with automated system backups, one small email among thousands, a grain of sand on a crowded beach. I checked the IP address 3 times, confirmed it belonged to the public Wi-Fi range, confirmed the email service supported anonymous registration, confirmed the wording contained nothing that could be traced back to my writing style. I'd removed every first-person pronoun, every habitual phrase, every turn of speech that might betray me. Satisfied, I hit send. Then I shut down the laptop, wrapped it in its original plastic bag, and shoved it back to the top of my closet. The whole operation took under 40 minutes. When I lay down to sleep, a sliver of dawn was already creeping through the curtain. I closed my eyes. My heartbeat was steady. The first stone had been thrown. The ripples would take a few days to reach the surface. Compliance responded faster than I'd anticipated. Wednesday afternoon, a short announcement appeared on the company intranet, buried mid-page in the internal news section. Headline reading, Compliance Department Routine Review Notice, 3 lines of text. Compliance is conducting a routine review of certain financial processes. Normal departmental operations will not be affected. Affected colleagues will be contacted individually if needed. The wording was gentle, a feather dropped on still water. But that same afternoon, around 4:30, I saw Michael coming up from the lower floors, and his face was tighter than usual. His lips were pressed together, his walking speed about 15% faster than normal. He didn't greet anyone as he crossed the open workspace, just walked straight into his office and closed the door with a slightly heavier click than usual. That evening, James didn't leave on time. He stayed an extra 2 hours, his screen glowing long after most of the floor had emptied. When I passed his desk on my way out, I caught a glimpse of his browser. He was in the company system's backend. Approval record search, date range set from July of the previous year to February of the current one. He was hunting through old records, and not very smoothly, typing in different keywords, deleting them, trying again. Something shifted in my chest when I saw that. They were checking. They were nervous. And nervous people make mistakes. I walked out of the building, the cold river air hitting my face, and followed the Thames path for 20 minutes, mentally mapping my next steps. 3 days of observation later, I made my second move. This time, not anonymous. I filed a formal internal complaint through the company's compliance channel, in my own name, using my corporate email, focused exclusively on the performance evaluation and salary reduction issues. I made no mention of any financial irregularities. The complaint included all my performance-related evidence, the unwarranted pay cut, the missing performance meetings, Michael's fabricated evaluation, my complete work allocation history. I stated 2 demands: a review of the salary reduction's legality, and restoration of my original salary with retroactive compensation. The reason for this separation came from a strategy session with Amy, one of the few people in London I could talk to about this kind of thing. Amy was a labor lawyer at a mid-sized firm in Holborn, Chinese-British, for years into her practice. We'd met at an alumni event, and after I gave her a rough outline of my situation, she dissected it with surgeon-like precision. "Right now you're holding 2 knives," Amy had said over coffee in a cafe near her office. "One is their financial misconduct. The other is your illegal pay cut. You use them differently. Financial knife goes straight into the compliance wound. Workplace knife goes through HR and labor arbitration. If you throw both knives together, they'll say you're reporting out of revenge, and your credibility gets diluted by half. So I throw the workplace knife first. You throw it, and you throw it openly. Let them see you following proper channels. Build a record. You complained, you followed process, you didn't act in the shadows. Once that knife is clean, when you reveal the other one, no one can claim it's personal. What if they fire me before I reveal the second one? Amy set her cup down, meeting my gaze squarely. If they fire you after you've filed a formal complaint, that's retaliation. UK labour law protects whistleblowers from retaliatory dismissal. The moment they try, your case escalates from internal complaint to external tribunal. So you need that first complaint time-stamped and delivery confirmed. That email date is your shield. I remembered. I submitted the complaint through the company system, complete workflow, electronic receipt at every step. Delivery timestamp down to the second. I took a full-screen screenshot, saved the receipt number in my cloud storage, labeled it Evidence 0. Compliance's response arrived 3 days later, a meeting invitation from a middle-level compliance officer named David, scheduling a Friday afternoon interview in the 8th floor conference room. The email ended with a one-line note, "You may bring a companion." I brought a voice recorder. UK employment law permits audio recordings in labor disputes, provided you disclose the recording to all parties beforehand and obtain consent. I'd researched the ACAS guidelines in advance, the relevant clauses saved in my phone for reference. I arrived 5 minutes early. David walked in on time, early 40s, tall, gray-blue suit, a dry steady handshake. I placed the recorder on the table and told him I'd be recording for accuracy. He nodded, then informed me that compliance would be making their own simultaneous record. 2 red lights blinked on. He reviewed my complaint materials, his brow tightening slightly but his professional composure intact. "Emily, you mentioned receiving a pay cut notice in November without any prior performance warning. Is that correct?" "Yes." Company Handbook, Chapter 7, Performance Management Section, explicitly requires 30 days written notice and a formal improvement opportunity before any major negative action. I received none. Do you have copies of all performance-related communications? I do. The email screenshots attached to my complaint are chronologically ordered, covering every work-related exchange from my first day to the present, including all direct communication with Michael and all HR interactions. David turned a few more pages. You received a performance improvement plan in March, but your workload had already been substantially reduced before that. Do you believe there's a connection? I believe my supervisor was systematically manufacturing evidence of underperformance. Evidence includes core projects transferred to a peer without handover procedures, my work allocation reduced by approximately 70% between month 4 and month 8, my leave requests were rejected twice without justification, leaving improper attendance records on my file. All details are in the supplementary materials. David closed the folder, leaned back, let his gaze rest on me for a moment. Emily, I'm going to formally initiate an investigation. That will involve interviewing everyone you've named, your supervisor, your colleagues. Are you willing to cooperate with follow-up interviews? Yes. I'm required to inform you, if the investigation finds your complaint without merit, the company reserves the right to take disciplinary action against you under internal policy. Do you understand and wish to proceed? I understand. I wish to proceed. Good. He made a note. I'll email you with next steps. I pocketed the recorder, thanked him, and walked out. In the hallway, I paused. The 8th floor windows faced west, and the afternoon light cut across the floor in long warm trapezoids. I turned back toward my own floor, and at the corridor bend, I glanced toward Michael's office. His door was open a crack. He stood by the window, back to the door, phone pressed to his ear, voice too low to catch. But his posture told me plenty, shoulders tight, one hand tapping the windowsill in an uneven rhythm. I walked back to my desk. The 3 weeks following that interview were a strange liminal period. On the surface, everything continued as normal, meetings, emails, reports. But underneath, something was in motion, slow and inexorable. David's team began pulling people for interviews, and each time someone returned from the 8th floor, their expression told a different story, some relieved, some troubled, some sitting down at their desks and staring at their screens for a long time before typing anything. Michael barely left his office after that. Coffee cups and papers were passed through James. James's smile had faded, his favorite mug went unwashed for days, a brown ring forming around the rim. I maintained a deliberate stillness during that period. Arrived on time, left on time, didn't speak a word beyond the strictly necessary, didn't participate in any kitchen gossip. Lunch alone at the window, sunlight tracing a bright line across my sandwich wrapper. Sometimes I thought about a different country, a different classroom, sitting in the last row. That same feeling of being outside a circle you didn't ask to be outside of, but knew better than to try to enter. The only difference now was the encrypted folder I carried with me everywhere. At the end of week 3, David sent a formal update through the system, a brief confirmation that the investigation was proceeding and additional materials might be requested. Neutral wording, no substantive details. But I noticed something. The CC field now included a code abbreviation for the company's headquarters legal team. I leaned back in my chair and drank a glass of water. It was cold, but my throat felt warm. Legal was involved. That meant the case had been elevated beyond HR. But around the same time, countercurrents began flowing from unexpected directions. One morning I opened Slack and found a colleague I'd been friendly with had blocked me, no warning, no explanation, just gone from my contacts. The last time we'd spoken, a week earlier in the kitchen, we'd chatted about weekend weather, utterly mundane. Then came the group chat silences. I posted a question about data alignment, tagged the relevant people. 40 minutes of dead quiet. Finally James responded, received, will check. Then silence again. It wasn't the silence of busy people. It was deliberate, careful, the frozen surface of a lake that's still running underneath. The one that really caught my attention came through HR, a temporary work redistribution plan, from Michael, asking me to transfer my remaining 2 client reports to a new hire within 5 days, to maintain operational independence during the investigation. The document was beautifully formatted, proper corporate templates, all the right clauses. But I understood what it was designed to do. If I handed over the reports, my workload would hit 0, and Michael could log. Emily performed no substantive work during the investigation period, ammunition for another round of performance claims. If I refused, he'd log, Emily refused work assignment. Either way, He'd have fresh negative material for the next review. A double dead end. I didn't walk into it. I hit reply on HR's email and wrote maybe 6 lines. Thanked them professionally, then stated, per ACAS Guidelines and Company Handbook Chapter 10, Section 3, during an active formal dispute, the employer may not unilaterally change the employee's core work duties without mutual agreement. I request that my work allocation remain consistent with its status prior to the investigation's commencement. If operational necessity requires adjustment, please provide written justification and copy the compliance investigation team for review. I finished with, I'm available for further discussion at any time. I CC'd 3 recipients, HR, Compliance's David, and myself for archival purposes. 3 sets of eyes on that thread. Anyone trying to manipulate it would have to think twice. Within 4 hours, a temporary redistribution was withdrawn without explanation. No follow-up email, no acknowledgement, no mention ever again. The task assignments in the system reverted to their previous state, as if nothing had ever happened. But I saw Michael when he came out to collect a print job. His stride was quicker than usual by about 2 steps. He passed my desk without the old habit of veering away. He walked straight past, his gaze flicking toward me for an instant before moving on. Too fast to read. But I read it anyway. That look was nothing like the one he'd worn when he said, "Your position in this company, I gave it to you." The superiority was gone. Something else had taken its place, something I couldn't quite name until later. The closest word I found was alertness. He wasn't looking at me. He was recalculating. The first week after Easter, David sent a second interview invitation. This one, he said, would cover additional financial information. Conservative phrasing as always. But that word, financial, in an investigation context told me more than paragraphs of explanation could. I sat at my desk reading the email, sunlight warming the keyboard under my hands. In my head, I reviewed the contents of my USB drive, in order. The top tier, 16 transactions, for accounts, £637,000, had never been shown to anyone. Even Amy hadn't seen the full version. The second and third tiers were already out there, already in David's hands. He'd seen 2 keys. Now he was asking where the third one was kept. When I walked into the 8th floor conference room that afternoon, I found David plus 2 new faces. One in a navy pantsuit. David introduced her as Patel, a lawyer from Headquarters Legal, her tone precise and professional. The other was older, gray-haired, introduced only as an external independent audit advisor, without specifying his firm. 3 people in the room, one of them external. The table had been raised to a different level of seriousness. I set my recorder on the table, declared the recording, received acknowledgement. David pulled up a projection. I recognized the table instantly, a summary of Asia-Pacific payments, chronologically arranged, with dates, amounts, approval statuses. All the key fields were there. But only a subset, maybe a third of the total data, and no mention of the 4 clearing accounts or their operational details. He had pieces. He hadn't assembled the whole picture. This table was a probe, designed to test how much I knew. "Emily," David said, his gaze shifting from the screen to me, during our system review, We identified several irregular payments related to the Asia-Pacific client. These payments fall within the period when you were managing that account. He paused. What can you tell me about them? I looked at him, then at the other two, then back. I can tell you everything. I need to connect my laptop to the projector. This was the moment I'd been building toward for 9 months. My hands were steady as I connected the laptop, opened the file, navigated to the right folder. The screen displayed a complete chronological table, all 16 transactions with no POs, each row accompanied by client correspondence screenshots, approval chain signatures, bank statements, system logs. Every missing element highlighted in red. Every red line ended with the same name. The final slide showed a structural diagram tracing the 4 clearing accounts' creation dates, requesters, stated purposes, and fund flows, a complete map of the architecture. The room fell quiet for about 10 seconds. Only the projector fan hummed in the background. Patel spoke first, her voice slightly lower than before. These records, when did you compile them? July of last year, I said. The first irregular payment appeared that month. I recorded it because it seemed like a process error. But as the irregular payments became routine, I realized this wasn't isolated. Why didn't you report it earlier? I held her gaze. Because in July, I raised a compliance concern with my direct supervisor. His response, exact words, was, "Your position in this company." I gave it to you. The air in the room shifted. Patel looked down at her notebook, her pen pausing. David stared at me, then at the rows of red highlights on the screen, and let out a slow breath. I unplugged my USB drive and set it on the table between us. This is the complete record. All original emails, system logs, bank statements, approval chains. Every file includes hash verification values. If you need to cross-reference against the system's raw data, every transaction can be traced back individually. David reached for the drive. His hand was steady, but his fingers paused for a fraction of a second on the metal casing before he placed it on top of his notebook. The investigation will need a few days to process this new material, he said. Please keep your contact channels open. I will. I packed my laptop, nodded to all 3, and walked out. Patel nodded back. The gray-haired advisor hadn't spoken the entire time, but as I turned, he let out a soft a sound that might have meant anything. The corridor was empty. April rain was falling outside, fine threads of water streaking the windows and blurring the towers beyond into a watercolor wash of gray-blue. The entire floor was silent, held in suspension. I went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and drank it slowly, leaning against the counter. Cold, clear, grounding. Every card was on the table. What happened next wasn't in my hands, or David's, or Patel's. The red highlighted rows would speak for themselves. They'd been waiting 9 months to say what they had to say. I set the glass down and walked back to my desk. The rain kept falling, beads of water racing each other down the glass, leaving silver trails across the sky. Over the next 2 weeks, the investigation entered a phase I couldn't observe directly but could sense through 1,000 small signals. David's team began using the 8th floor conference room at odd hours. When I stayed late and passed by, I'd see the frosted glass glowing from inside, shadows moving behind it. System access logs showed compliance accounts running searches late into the night, querying vendor names and account codes from my table. I couldn't see the results, but as someone who'd lived in financial systems for years, I could read the workload patterns: dense clusters of data pulls, then long stretches of document editing. They'd moved from discovery to composition. They were writing the conclusion. Michael barely left his office. His lunches were delivered to the small table outside his door. He'd reach out, grab the bag, and the door would close again. James's behavior had changed too. He no longer roamed the floor with his coffee mug, making small talk. He sat in his cubicle, face to the screen, and when his phone rang he spoke in clipped, rapid tones, the cadence of someone explaining something urgently. Twice I passed behind him and caught a glimpse of his personal email window open on his monitor. He was communicating outside official channels, a detail worth noting. The department's temperature was shifting. Some colleagues who'd avoided me began initiating greetings again, making eye contact in the kitchen, asking how I was, their tone noticeably warmer than before. I didn't respond much, just nodded and moved on. I'd watched this department's wind direction change too many times to confuse seasonal variation with genuine alignment. Some people turn with genuine goodwill, others just turn with the wind. The clearest signal came from HR. In the third week of April, Sarah sent me an internal message asking if I'd stop by her office. Her tone had changed from the formal stiffness of previous months, softer, more personal. I went. She had 2 cups of tea waiting on her desk, one pushed to my side. "Emily, there's something I want to say," she began, both hands wrapped around her cup, looking at the space between us rather than at me. "I went back through the records on your performance evaluation. There were procedural gaps. For example, the signature line for the feedback session was blank. According to policy, no evaluation is valid without employee sign-off. I didn't catch it at the time because Michael included a note saying you were unable to attend due to scheduling conflicts. But when I cross-checked your attendance and meeting records for that period, I found no absences. None." She spoke more slowly than usual, each word carefully measured, as if verifying them aloud one at a time. "I should have caught this earlier. I didn't. I'm sorry." I took a sip of the tea. It was exactly the right temperature. "I appreciate you telling me this, Sarah. I understand that you processed this based on trust in a director-level submission. That responsibility isn't entirely on you. But I need to know, does this affect the current investigation?" She looked up then, and something in her face had loosened, like relief, or belated solidarity. "David has all this information. I can't say much more, but between your complaint and some other things that surfaced, the full picture is becoming clear." "Other things?" She didn't specify. But I knew that my table's 16 red rows had been cross-verified in the system at least 15 times each, and when one name appears consistently across 15 independent data points, the pattern writes itself. I stepped out of Sarah's office into the corridor. April sky, thin clouds, a sliver of silver light rimming their edges. I sent Amy a brief message, progressing. Next phase. She replied a few minutes later with a series of emojis, ending with a sunglasses-wearing smile. Amy never asked for details. She knew I'd tell her what she needed to know when she needed to know it. By the first week of May, the investigation's shape was solidifying beyond my view. David's team had shifted from active searching to report writing. The system patterns told me that much. Fewer database queries, more document editing sessions. They were finalizing. That same week, I received a calendar invitation with no body text and a title that said simply, Department All Hands, Important Announcement. Sender, HR, recipients, everyone in business intelligence. Time, 10 o'clock the following morning. Location, the fourth floor training room, the big one with the stage and the projection screen. I stared at the invitation for a long time. All hands. Important announcement. In any company, that combination meant structural change. The last time this room had been used for an all hands, we were announcing an acquisition, the time before, a new CEO. This time I knew what lay behind the curtain, but I didn't know exactly how it would be pulled back. That night I went to bed early. Streetlight bled through a gap in the curtains, tracing a thin arc across the ceiling. I ran through possible scenarios, best, worst, middle, then turned on my side and fell asleep. The next morning, I arrived 20 minutes early. In the elevator, I ran into two women from finance who exchanged a quick glance when they saw me, then looked away. The digital display counted from 1 to 4 in silence, interrupted only by the ventilation hum. The fourth floor training room was already open. Chairs arranged in rows, a laptop and wireless microphone on the podium, projection screen lowered but blank. Two people in dark suits stood at opposite ends of the room. I recognized Patel from the earlier meeting, the other I didn't know, but the security badge on his jacket identified his role. They were positioned like pillars, deliberately placed, deliberately still. People filtered in gradually. The room filled, 30-plus colleagues standing, sitting, murmuring in low tones like distant surf. I took a seat midway back, against the wall, leaving the chair next to me empty. James arrived about 3 minutes late, pausing at the entrance to scan the room before choosing a far corner, arms crossed, face empty of expression. Michael came in last. Dark gray suit, more formal than usual. His walk was as steady as ever, back straight, chin at that practiced angle from the golf course photo. But I could read something different in his gait, longer strides than normal, heavier footfalls. He was working to maintain a posture that no longer came naturally. He took a seat beside the podium, set his folder on his knee, and looked at the cover. Not at anyone. At exactly 10 o'clock, the door closed. Patel stepped to the podium, tapped the microphone once, and began to speak. Her tempo was slower than in our previous meeting, each word spaced half a beat longer than natural, as if she were reading a text that had been revised many times. Good morning. I'm Patel, from Headquarters Legal. This meeting is to communicate the final findings of an internal investigation. The investigation was conducted by compliance, authorized by the Audit Committee, and covered certain financial approval workflows within business intelligence over the past 11 months. The room's ambient noise vanished. No coughs, no paper rustling, no shifting chairs. Everyone was holding still, holding breath, compressing the air into a solid thing. The investigation was initiated in March of this year, triggered by a formal employee complaint. During the subsequent review, compliance identified multiple irregular payments lacking full procurement contracts, totaling £637,000, all related to the management of our Asia-Pacific flagship client. Patel paused, raised her gaze, scanned the room once. Her eyes passed over my section with a pause so brief I might have imagined it. With audit committee authorization, compliance, and an external independent auditor conducted a full retrospective review of all 16 identified transactions. The review covered existence and completeness of original procurement contracts, electronic signature verification across all approval chains, bank statement to payment reconciliation, and fund flow tracking through all clearing accounts. The conclusion: all 16 transactions lacked valid procurement contracts. All 16 had the same responsible party listed as final approver. 11 of 16 involved funds that, upon entry into clearing accounts, were not transferred to formal project ledgers within the mandatory 15 working days. When Patel said, "all 16, someone near the front drew a sharp breath. The sound was small but distinct, audible in that vacuum of stillness. No one turned to look. Every pair of eyes in the room was fixed on the podium, on Patel's unreadable expression. Based on these findings, the Audit Committee has resolved the following. First, termination of employment for the primary responsible party, effective immediately, processed by HR. Second, written warning and position reassignment for individuals who played supporting roles in the irregularities, with no promotion eligibility for the next 12 months. Third, all affected payments will be reconciled within 1 week to ensure accurate client accounting. Fourth, complete list of individuals involved, operational records, and investigation findings have been submitted to the Industry Ethics Board for permanent record. The phrase, effective immediately, settled into the quiet, and Patel waited 2 or 3 seconds to let it land. She closed her folder, gave a small nod toward the audience. Additional operational details and next steps will be communicated by HR via email. If you have individual questions related to this investigation, you may request an appointment through the HR system by the end of today. No public Q&A session. Thank you. She gathered her materials and walked away from the podium with clean, unhurried steps. The security officer by the door stepped aside. Patel passed by the chair where Michael sat without slowing, without glancing sideways, as if passing an empty seat. Michael was still sitting in that chair. His folder lay closed on his knee. It had never been opened. About 5 seconds passed after Patel left before he moved, a small motion, reaching down, lifting the folder from his lap and standing up slowly. No sound. He stood in the space beside the podium, his back to everyone, looking at something on the tabletop. His suit was still immaculate. His silver cufflinks still caught the white edge of the projection screen's light. Then he walked toward the door. His stride was almost the same as when he'd entered, but I saw a minute difference. His shoulders had dropped by perhaps a thumb's width. That tiny curve, the difference between someone sitting on the stage and someone walking out the door. The carpet muffled his footsteps, fading into silence. The room stayed quiet for another 10 seconds. Then movement began, small things first, pens being capped, notebooks closed, a soft cough. Chairs scraped against the floor, the sound of ice cracking on a thawing lake, fissures spreading outward. People rose, drifted toward the exit in small groups, exchanging glances that all meant the same thing. I didn't stand immediately. People passed me as they filed out, and someone patted my shoulder lightly, not quite a greeting, more like recognition. I didn't turn to see who it was. I just nodded. Then I stood, pushed my chair in, collected my things, and walked toward the door. In the hallway, people were already murmuring. I heard 637 and the clearing account as I passed the kitchen, voices low but the words unmistakable. I didn't stop. At the elevator bank, James stood with his back to me, facing the metallic reflection of the doors. He might have seen me approaching, he might not have. But he didn't turn. When the elevator arrived, he stepped in, and the doors closed on his downward gaze, fixed on his shoes, which were black Oxfords today, not the brown polished pair he'd always worn. I took the stairs. Back on the 18th floor, I sat at my desk with a sense of calm I hadn't anticipated. I unlocked my computer, opened my inbox, and refreshed. An email from HR sat at the top, notification of organizational changes. The first paragraph confirmed the director's immediate departure and interim coverage. Further down, a single line, affected employees' compensation adjustments will be reviewed and retroactive payments will be completed within 5 working days. Short sentence. I read it twice. 5 working days. Then I closed my email and leaned back, looking out at the Thames. The water was calm today, clouds moving in from the west, sunlight breaking through in angled shafts, scattering across the surface into restless light. I'd seen that light on my first day, too, only the angle from the 18th floor was different now. My phone buzzed. Amy saw the all hands. Status. I typed 1 character, done. She wrote back, dinner. Your treat. I laughed, a sound I hadn't heard from myself in a while. I set the phone down and looked at my desktop. The encrypted folder icon sat in the corner, quiet and unobtrusive. I stared at it for a few seconds. My cursor hovered. Then I moved it away. Not yet. The final accounting wasn't complete. But that chapter was over. The mood on the floor shifted in the afternoon, a subtle but unmistakable change in the room's acoustic signature. More voices, more movement, laughter rising from somewhere near the kitchen. The spring that had been compressed too long was finally releasing. Alan McGregor was announced as the new director 2 days later. 50s, Scottish, his voice low and unforced, his chin lifted but without condescension. His first department meeting, he stood beside the podium instead of behind it, no slides, no prepared remarks. I'm Alan. 6 years in compliance before this, so I'm familiar with some parts of what just happened. His eyes swept the room once, evenly, no special weight on me or anyone else. I don't like bureaucracy. From now on, your work is your work, your credit is your credit. Problems go through proper channels, I'll make sure nobody gets punished unfairly. But I'll also make sure nobody plays games. This applies to everyone, including me. Someone near the front laughed. Alan glanced that way and smiled. Right, that's it. Back to work. He walked out with a lighter step than his predecessor ever had, footfalls even and unhurried. His back, as he left, told a different story than the one that had left 2 days earlier. Same hallway, same room, entirely different direction. Later that afternoon, HR's second email arrived. The numbers were precise. Every cent of the pay cut was backpaid retroactively. My personnel file was corrected, the fabricated evaluation expunged, and a formal letter of apology appended. The closing sentence read, "We regret the distress you experienced during this matter. The company will continue strengthening process oversight to prevent recurrence." I saved the email, printed a hard copy, and placed it with my other documents in the safe. 1 year's span between the first envelope and this one. Then I reset the combination. A week later, I sat alone in my flat, streetlight turning the curtains amber, and opened the encrypted folder one last time. 16 rows. 4 accounts. 637,000. The red highlights, the single name. Numbers I'd memorized, dates I'd lived by, they no longer carried any emotional weight. A book read to the last page, the words still there but the hand turning them no longer needing them. I selected all files, right-clicked, selected permanent delete. Confirmation box asked for my 6-digit code. I entered it. The folder vanished. The recycle bin emptied. The screen cleared to its default wallpaper, a photo of the Thames at sunrise, gold light spreading across the water. I sat for a while in the silence. Then I closed the laptop, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. Cold, clean, ordinary. That flat, unremarkable taste, it wasn't emptiness. It was the sensation of putting down something you'd carried for too long, your arms finally free to hang at your sides. The next morning, Alan was already in his office, the one Michael had occupied. Desk clean except for a laptop and a water glass. He called me in as I passed. "Emily, sit down for a minute." I sat across from him. He leaned back, looking at me with that direct gaze I'd seen at his first meeting. "I looked at that client risk framework you built," he said. "The one you put together from those 2 maintenance reports when you had nothing else to work on. Cross-referencing logic is tighter than our standard models. How long did that take you?" "More time than I had anything else to do with, once my work was cut back." He nodded, confirming something he'd already guessed. "The promotion list goes out next week. I want you to know your name's on it. Not because you survived, because your best work came out at your most marginalized. That framework is usable, right now, across the department. It's worth a senior manager's title. And so are you." He said it plainly, then took a sip of water, as if that chapter was closed. He asked about my weekend, where I lived, whether the commute was manageable, small, ordinary things. But in that context, those questions felt like a light being turned up one notch, expanding from a corner to a room. I walked out into sunlight pouring through the east windows, pooling in gold across the floor. On my monitor, the company intranet was showing a story about a comprehensive financial process review, with Alan's photo attached. I sat down and opened my emails. First, meeting reminder. Second, project plan for the new quarter. Third, a report to verify, standard stuff, familiar formats. My fingers moving over the keyboard with the same rhythm they'd had my first day at this desk. But the folder structure on this machine had changed. The encrypted name was gone. The red highlights were gone. Late afternoon, an intern came to my desk, holding a printed process guide, pointing to an approval clause she didn't understand. I took the sheet, explained it over 3 minutes, and watched her take notes, her pen moving quickly. When she looked up and said, "Got it, thanks," I saw in her expression the same trust I'd carried once, before I learned that trust needed polishing into something harder, colder, clearer. I left the building as evening settled over London, orange bleeding from behind the clouds and staining the river in long warm washes. I stood by the water for a while, the wind off the surface carrying a faint dampness. Someone jogged past, someone cycled, ringing a bell. My phone buzzed. "Amy, weekend. I'm choosing the place." I typed back, "You choose." "I'm buying." Her reply came instantly, "Then I'm choosing the most expensive one." I felt the smile pull across my face, real and unforced. Walking toward the station, I watched the streetlights come on one by one along the riverbank, like someone walking back from a long distance, leaving lights on behind them. I turned at the station entrance to look back at the water one last time. The gold was shrinking into the horizon, but a trace of orange still lingered along the cloud edges. I walked down the steps, tapped my card, and the train's approach rose from the tunnel, swelling into a steady roar. The doors opened. I stepped in and found a seat. The train pulled away, and station lights slid past the window, faster and faster, until they blurred into a single ribbon of light vanishing into the dark. In the last moment before that ribbon disappeared, a word surfaced in my mind: clearance. Cleared out. No longer part of the calculation. The numbers, the dates, the red highlighted names, they'd been a mechanism pressing down on me. Now they were just archived records in a folder I'd never open again. Ahead, the lights of the next station were already visible, waiting. When the train stopped and I stepped onto the platform, evening air met me at the exit, carrying the city's layered smells. I walked home, faster than before, because the weekend plan was already set in my phone: an expensive restaurant, a window table, 2 people who'd come through a long war in one piece, sitting face to face, raising their glasses to a past finally released and a present just beginning. That small, clear sound, glass meeting glass, would say more than any victory speech ever could.